You know, a lot of people have been asking me as I've started this channel, hey, I really want to get started with Stephen King, but he has so many books, he likes to write in so many genres. What's the best place to start? And if I've already read a couple of books and I want to explore more of his works, where should I go from here? I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and this is your guide to reading Stephen King. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer, now also a booktuber. You can find my music in book adaptations like The Wheel of Time, His Dark Materials, and the official companion album for Brent Week's Lightbringer series, among others. And I wanted to talk to you about my favorite author of all time, Stephen King. I have a whole shelf dedicated to the man back there, if you can't tell already. I love his books. I've read about 55 or so, and I'm very much looking forward to reading the rest of his works. I only have a few left. The guy is prolific though, so he keeps writing and we are very grateful for it. But as I've started this channel and as I've done Stephen King content on this channel, I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, where do I start with Stephen King? Never read a book of his, or I read one, but I don't know if that was the right place to start, right? The guy's prolific. He's written books in the sci-fi genre, fantasy, horror. Sometimes it's a mishmash. Crime fiction has been his recent kind of discovery and something that he's been pursuing actively. So he's a very prolific author in a variety of genres. So I'm going to kind of divide this into several categories for you, and that way you can kind of choose your own adventure. The first category would be the Stephen King starter pack. Basically, if you haven't read any Stephen King, or if you've only read a book or so and you're not sure if that was the right place to start, this is your starting point. The second would be for the fans of the chonk, not for the faint of heart. Lot of complexity of characters, but it is definitely worth a journey, and among some of his best works, honestly. The third category is for fantasy fans who don't really like to read straight horror but want something else, and this might be a good entry point for you for Stephen King. Another one is for crime fiction fans, because as I mentioned, lately especially, he's been exploring a lot of crime fiction. But, you know, he writes a lot of stuff and it's not always sure where is the starting point for some of these, because some of these characters proliferate through books and you don't want to be spoiled of some of those crime fiction entries. So this would be the place for you to start. Then there's a political thriller and kind of genre mashup category. And then last is the underrated classics. Books that should be more classic, but I think because so many of Stephen King's works have been adapted and adapted so well and are in the pop culture lexicon, it's kind of, some of these fall off the radar, but I'm going to show you why they should be thought of and revered in the same light as some of his more famous works. So if you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for your patience on this intro. Let's jump on in to the Stephen King starter pack. Now, Stephen King got his name in horror. He is the master of horror, and for good reason. His books explore horror not only in the supernatural, but also the evil that people do to each other and themselves. So the first, I have 4 entries in this starter pack that I would recommend to you. If you've not read any Stephen King, I'll go over them really quickly and give you a little quick tagline selling point of each. The first is Pet Sematary. This was the first Stephen King book I ever read, and it blew me away. It is one of Stephen King's most scary, but it's not scary in the way you think. It's not just about the supernatural, it's a meditation on grief. It's about how far one would be willing to go to see their loved ones again, what cost, what price they'd be willing to pay. And it's also a struggle of addiction, you know, what the main character goes through in this book, both in terms of his family dynamics and then also his kind of inner demons. They're in full display here, and they manifest themselves through the supernatural. So it is about a house that is close by to some ancient burial ground and has become a pet cemetery. But do things that are buried there stay dead? Are one's demons that are buried also stay dead? Fantastic book. Check it out, Pet Sematary. Second book would be about a fan. Now, not just any fan, someone's number one fan. A guy who has just written his latest novel is traveling through the woods in a snowy afternoon. Car accident, wakes up in an unfamiliar surrounding, but thank goodness This author's number one fan is there to protect him from himself, or maybe keep him prisoner. This one is called Misery. Now, the adaptation is fantastic, but the book in its own right is incredible. It's a 400-page book. It's a shorter read of Stephen King's. Definitely a great place to start, and not one of his necessarily classic horror books, but is always up there on the list. The third would be the seminal The Shining. Everybody knows about Stanley Kubrick's adaptation and Jack Nicholson's incredible portrayal of Jack Torrance. But my God, the book is incredible as well in its own right, and it diverges quite a bit from the movie. So even if you've seen the movie, you gotta read about the book and see why Room 237 is so scary on the written page. Fantastic. It's a classic. The Shining. Definitely check it out. The fourth one I would recommend is Salem's Lot. One of Stephen King's scarier books. It was his second published novel after Carrie. And this one is rightfully so. It has made vampires terrifying. There are a few scenes in particular that are scary, but it's also so much more. It makes this whole town of several different cast of characters kind of come to life, and it becomes a theme that is reoccurrent in Stephen King's books, is his ability to make a whole small town come to life, even if it's the unliving dead. So, vampire novel, Salem's Lot, check it out. The next category is for chonk fans of the 1,000-pagers plus. And this is not for everybody. They go in weird territory, but they are some of Stephen King's best. The first one, of course, is going to be featuring everybody's favorite clown, Pennywise the Clown, It. This was published in 1986, and my goodness, around 1,100 pages, but the town comes to life in a way that I've not seen other books do. Pennywise the Clown is interesting because you think of him as the clown, but he really is an ancient evil that makes this whole town over 100 plus years sick, Derry, Maine, because he's kind of infecting the town and its constituents. He goes after kids because kids have an imagination and they are vulnerable. It's about a group of kids and their coming of age as they deal with this horrible nightmare of an entity, and then 28 years later have to go back and finish what they started. It's about the friendship and the bond of these people as much as it is about the evil that people do to each other, superimposed against the supernatural It and Pennywise the Clown. So definitely check this one out. This is a chonker, again, 1,100 pages or so, but definitely worth your time. One of his best, in my opinion. The next one, of course, is The Stand. This one is the longest one. The unabridged version, which I highly recommend you check out, is around almost 1,200 pages. And the writing is like microscopic, you know? So it is a hefty 1,200 pages. What is it about? It's about Captain Trips, this virus that wipes out more than 99% of the population. But it's really about the survivors and about this almost biblical good versus evil. You start to see a couple of the characters on the antagonist side that make their reoccurring appearance throughout Stephen King's novels. So if you want a bridge to other Stephen King worlds, this is a great place to read. And if you like your chonkers, this is an almost 1,200 page chonker. So you'll get your fill. The Stand. The last one is actually a bit more underrated, but it belongs in the chonk category because this one is also hefty. This is one of my personal favorites. It's called Needful Things. Now imagine a place called Castle Rock, Maine, becomes the feature of a lot of other Stephen King novels, including some on this list. Town of almost 50 characters, but you get to know each and every one. Everyone has an idiosyncrasy, a strength and a weakness that's exploited by a guy named Leland Gaunt, who opens up a shop that will grant you anything you want, as long as you do him a favor or two. Now, those favors start off as a little bit more like pranks, and then it becomes more nefarious, and Leland Gaunt's true intentions for the town become revealed. And it is probably one of the greatest Stephen King books, and I don't know why it doesn't make it a more top 5 list, in my opinion. It deserves to be in a top 5 spot for Stephen King. Again, chonker, it's like 800 pages, something like that. So definitely check this one out if you haven't already. Now, let's go to the fantasy section. There are a few fantasy entry points. I will make personal recommendations and also give you a couple of other options in case you want to choose. But if you want a shorter fantasy read that feels a bit more like a fairy tale gone wrong in Stephen King fashion, I would recommend starting with Eyes of the Dragon. Now, Stephen King wrote this for his child, actually, as something that he would be able to read to his child, because his children were young at the time, and he writes a lot of horrific stuff, so he wanted to do something that felt more like a fairy tale, but of course twisted in Stephen King fashion. This is a great entry point. It's only a couple hundred pages, so really a quick read. But if you are feeling more ambitious, then I highly recommend you check out his seminal work, the Dark Tower series. It's a 7-book series with an 8th book called Wind Through the Keyhole, which came out much later and is more of a side quest novel. And this series is about a guy named Roland Deschain, a lone gunslinger in a town that is in a world that has since moved on. Almost feels like a Western mashup with a fantasy, horror, sci-fi, pop culture references. He is in pursuit of the Man in Black and leading himself to the Dark Tower. He's compelled to reach the Dark Tower at all costs. But why? It's a mystery, even to himself. He makes some friends along the way, and I think the friendships are some of the greatest parts of the series. Now, the first book he wrote way before he published his first novel, which was Carrie. The Gunslinger was published, I think, in 1982. It was a vignette of short stories. So it is not the best representation of the Dark Tower. I know plenty of people who stopped there, and rightfully so. I remember reading The Gunslinger, didn't quite hit for me. I almost stopped, and oh my god, I would have regretted it, because this series changed my life, my friends. It has made me think about the world and our place in it different, and it also has roots to branches. It leads to other Stephen King novels. So I will say, luckily, you don't have to read the other Stephen King novels to prepare for the Dark Tower, except for one glaring exception. If you're going to attempt the Dark Tower series, in book 5, it spoils some of the main plot elements of Salem's Lot. So I would recommend, if you're going to read anything before you read up to book 5, read Salem's Lot for sure. But otherwise, sky's the limit. One of the greatest fantasy series of all time, and it's barely even just a pure fantasy, but my god, it packs a punch. The Dark Tower series. And then the last one is kind of an optional category. I wouldn't say these are necessarily the best places to start, but I've heard from this channel of people who have started here and actually really enjoyed it. So I wanted to pose that to you. The first is called The Talisman. The Talisman is interesting because it's kind of got this alternate world portal fantasy thing going on, but it becomes more fleshed out in, say, the Dark Tower series. He wrote this with Peter Straub, and in my opinion, it didn't quite land in the same way as The Dark Tower does, when Stephen King was kind of free to be his weird self, So I would say not necessarily the best place to start, but I've heard of people really enjoying this one. And they have a sequel called The Black House, and he's working on another one in the trilogy now that is going to tie together the Talisman universe with the Dark Tower. So we have that to look forward to as well. And the last one is one of his newer works called Fairy Tale. This is as much a coming-of-age story. I would say 50% of the book is a coming-of-age story, and then the last 50% is pure fantasy. And it's like fantasy in an almost fever dream nightmare scenario, dark fantasy. Really great stuff. Highly recommend you check it out if you like both coming-of-age and fantasy. But that is the fantasy list. Let's go to crime fiction. Crime fiction now, Stephen King has written so many books in crime fiction. Some are offshoots of one particular idea and feature his now favorite character, Holly Gibney, in various novels. The problem is if you start on some of those other standalones, they might spoil some of the things in the seminal work that got it all started. So I would recommend starting with the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. A guy plows into a line of people waiting for a job interview and kills like 15 people. It becomes a game of cat and mouse between this serial killer and a retired cop. And Bill Hodges is the retired cop, and it is a beautiful game of cat and mouse. It is extremely well written, and it's one of those few trilogies where the sequel, I would say, is even better than the first book. But you got to start with the first book, Mr. Mercedes. Then you got to follow it with Finders Keepers and end it with End of Watch. Once you're done with that, you are ready to go to some of his other offshoots like The Outsider, or his short story collection, which features Holly Gibney, If It Bleeds, or even his book, Holly. Yeah. So you want to check out some of these other ones before you get to those. And the best place to start with the crime fiction is Mr. Mercedes trilogy. The next one is kind of a category of its own. It's a political thriller. It's a time travel story. It's a romance for the ages. It posits the question, what's our place in the universe? What if the past can be changed, but it wants to actively stop you from changing it. This is 11/22/63. This is on most people's top 10 Stephen King list, which is surprising because he wrote this in 2011. So you wouldn't imagine something this late in the game would be this good. But in my opinion, it's got Stephen King's best ending. It is one of those books where it just captured my heart. And every time I read it, it feels as good as the first time. It's about a guy who can travel back in time to stop the Kennedy assassination, because it's the idea that that was the turning point in American politics and American history. The only problem is he can only go back to a particular day in 1958. The assassination famously happened in 1963, hence the date of the title of the novel. So he has to wait and get a job and live in 1958, biding his time to 1963. Now, if he misses his opportunity, he can go back, but he keeps getting older and time keeps moving by. Its perception of time is brilliant. The love story in this is fantastic and tastefully done. Gotta check out 11/22/63 if you haven't. And the last category is underrated classics. Now, before you check out this last category, I just want to ask you to do me a favor. If you're liking this video so far, the best free ways you can help the channel is to give it a like, give it a subscribe, share it with a friend, someone you think might enjoy this kind of Stephen King primer, and leave a comment. Let me know what I missed on this list, because, you know, I'm a Stephen King completionist through and through, but I haven't completed just quite everything. I might have missed a couple. Now, let's go to that last category, underrated classics. The first one I want to talk about has probably one of Stephen King's most horrifying endings, and it's called Revival. Came out around similar time as 11/22/63, so late in the game. It's a coming-of-age story. It's a parallel of this kid growing up from when he's a kid, this pastor, and the idea of like what happens after we die, and what will we do to find those questions out, and what do we pay to find those questions out. It is this beautiful intertwining of these two characters and how their fates are intertwined as well. And yeah, one of Stephen King's darkest endings. So definitely check out Revival. The second one I would mention is actually also a chonker, but it is an extension of the idea that he first introduced in Needful Things, which is a town coming to life. And you get to know every character in that town. Under the Dome. This came out around 2000, in the late 2000s, I believe. And it's about a dome that mysteriously appears around the town, cutting it off from civilization. What would happen to that town if that happened? How fast would they evolve to solve the problem or devolve? It's an exercise in human nature and kind of what can happen when people are kind of penned in like that. It's incredible. And you get to know every character in the town, and they're equally compelling. I thought the ending was brilliant, in my opinion. Some people love it, some people don't like it as much, but if you like Needful Things and you want another that feels like in the flavor of that with the small town vibes, Under the Dome is the one you got to check out. The next one is kind of polar opposite to this because it is one of the shortest books on the list at 280 pages, but in my opinion, it's one of the best Stephen King books out there. It is Cujo. Cujo I read a couple years ago now. It's about a rabid dog, but the idea is it's still a dog, right? The dog is as much a victim as the people he afflicts. It's very interesting because it really takes place in a neighborhood and it's between these two houses. So it's a very small, contained plot, right? And that's, I think, what makes it so terrifying. It's like, where do you go if you are trapped around a rabid dog? And we know the dog is a victim too. But when you're in that moment, facing that fear, right? And that rabid dog, what is that? Is it feels like it's a monster, right? But it's just a dog. But there's something very monstrous about that idea. Brilliant. One of Stephen King's most risky endings, I would say. But in my opinion, it lands. I think it's one of his best works. And it also deals with marriage dynamics and family dynamics in a way that I haven't really seen too many books explored. And really only how Stephen King would do it. So I would really recommend this one if you haven't checked it out. I was blown away. And I think he even gives some of the stuff in the dog's point of view, which sounds like it should be insane, but it actually works really well. So Cujo, definitely check out why everyone hypes this one up. And the last one I would mention is another book called The Dead Zone. Now, The Dead Zone came out in the early 80s. This is about a guy who gets in a car accident, wakes up after a coma of 5 years, and suddenly can see the future. Now, the future ends up being about political things, and a lot of people say this book, it was kind of prescient for the times. And the idea that, like, if you could stop that future from happening, would you do it? What cost would you pay personally? And what are you actually doing by changing that history? Are you actually helping people? So fascinating book. And I just thought the main character was very compelling. And some of the most visceral Stephen King imagery I've found in a book was in this book. I don't know why it's not more mentioned, and I guess it's just because Stephen King is a banger of an author. He's written so many books that have made its way into popular culture that I guess it's kind of hard to choose, right? But The Dead Zone should not be overlooked because it's a fantastic novel. What have I missed from this list? What did you think of this list? I just want to make this a primer for people who just don't know where to start with Stephen King and organize it. Hopefully this helps you a little bit. I'm Nick Hill with Shelf-Esteem. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about Stephen King and books in general. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing and sharing. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. I hope you enjoy your Stephen King reads. And I'll see you as always on the next video. Take care.